My wife took me to dinner with her German boss. I smiled like a fool, pretending I didn't speak German. She caressed her stomach and told him, "Don't worry, the idiot is so happy about the pregnancy. He will raise your son thinking it's his." I calmly poured more wine and said in perfect German, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow this story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." I should have known something was wrong the moment Cassidy suggested dinner with her boss. In our 5 years of marriage, she had never once wanted me to meet Albert Richter. She always claimed their relationship was strictly professional, that mixing business with personal life was inappropriate. Yet there I was, sitting across from them at Das House, watching my wife laugh at his jokes with an intimacy that made my stomach turn. The restaurant was exactly the kind of place Cassidy loved. Expensive, exclusive, the type where a single meal cost more than most people spent on groceries in a week. The mahogany paneling gleamed under soft lighting, and the scent of sauerbraten and fresh bread filled the air. White tablecloths crisp as fresh snow, crystal glasses that caught the light just so. Everything perfect, everything calculated to impress. Albert had chosen the restaurant, of course. He was the type of man who always had to be in control, had to show his wealth and sophistication. 48 years old, impeccably dressed in what I recognized as a $3,000 suit, his silver hair slicked back in a way that screamed European sophistication. His accent was slight but noticeable, a reminder of his German heritage that he wore like a badge of honor. I sat there in my off-the-rack blazer, feeling distinctly out of place. At 43, I had done well for myself as an electrical engineer, pulling in $250,000 a year, but in this crowd I might as well have been a janitor. Cassidy had insisted I dress up for the occasion, spending hours picking out my clothes like I was a child going to picture day. The conversation flowed easily between them, too easily. They spoke about colleagues I had never heard her mention, shared inside jokes that excluded me completely. I watched Cassidy's face light up when she looked at him, an expression I hadn't seen directed at me in months, maybe years. The way she leaned forward when he spoke, how her fingers traced the rim of her wine glass when she laughed at his stories. I tried to participate, asking polite questions about their work, but every attempt felt forced, artificial. They would pause, include me just enough to be polite, then dive back into their private world. I was a third wheel at my own wife's dinner, an uncomfortable observer to an intimacy I was beginning to recognize wasn't entirely professional. Cassidy looked radiant that night. She had spent the entire afternoon at the salon, getting her blonde hair styled in loose waves that framed her face perfectly. Her makeup was flawless, her dress a deep emerald that I had never seen before and probably cost more than my car payment. She was glowing in that way pregnant women are supposed to glow, her hand occasionally drifting to the small bump that was just beginning to show. The pregnancy had been a surprise, announced just 3 months earlier with tears of joy and promises of the perfect family we would build together. I remembered the moment she showed me the positive test, how my heart had soared with the possibility of becoming a father. At 43, I had given up on the idea of children, but suddenly there was this gift, this second chance at the family I had always wanted. Now, watching her across the table, something felt wrong. The timeline had always bothered me, though I had pushed the doubts aside. She had announced the pregnancy right after returning from a business trip to Munich, the same trip where she had worked closely with Albert on a major acquisition. When I asked about the dates, she had been vague, dismissive, telling me I worried too much about details. The waiter brought another bottle of wine, something German that Albert had selected with great ceremony. He poured for all of us, though Cassidy only pretended to sip hers, citing the pregnancy. I noticed Albert didn't seem disappointed by her abstinence. If anything, he seemed pleased, protective even. The way he looked at her when she mentioned the baby made something cold settle in my stomach. That was when they started speaking German. It began innocuously enough. Albert made a comment about the wine, something about the region it came from. Cassidy responded in what I assumed was agreement, her pronunciation smooth and confident. I had known she spoke some German from her college years, but I had never heard her speak it with such fluency, such comfort. I sat there, smiling like the fool they clearly thought I was, as their conversation shifted entirely into German. They didn't even attempt to include me, didn't pause to translate or explain. I was simply furniture at that point, a decoration that happened to be sharing their table. My grandmother had been German. She had come to America as a young woman but had never lost her language, her culture. She had insisted on teaching me German as a child, making me spend summers with her practicing until I was fluent. It was one of my few secrets, something I had never shared with anyone, not even Cassidy. There had never been a reason to mention it, never been an opportunity where it mattered. Until tonight. I listened, my face maintaining the same polite, confused smile as Albert told my wife how proud he was of her performance. Not her work performance, but her performance with me. How convincing she was, how well she played the role of the devoted wife. My hand tightened around my wine glass as Cassidy laughed, a sound like crystal breaking. She told him how easy it was, how I believed everything she said without question, how trusting I was, how naive. The word she used was tulpelhaft, foolish, clumsy, stupid. Albert leaned closer, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a whisper. He asked about my reaction to the pregnancy news, whether I had suspected anything. Cassidy shook her head, her hand moving to caress her stomach in a gesture I had thought was maternal instinct but now recognized as something else entirely. Don't worry, she said in German, her voice filled with cruel amusement. The idiot is so happy about the pregnancy. He will raise your son thinking it's his. The world stopped. Everything around me seemed to freeze in that moment. The gentle clinking of glasses from other tables, the soft murmur of conversations, the warm glow of the candlelight, all of it faded into background noise as those words echoed in my mind. Your son. Not our son. Your son. I sat there, my face still wearing that same stupid, trusting smile, as my entire life collapsed around me. 5 years of marriage, reduced to a performance. 3 months of joy about becoming a father, revealed as the cruelest joke imaginable. Every tender moment, every shared dream, every promise of forever. Nothing but lies crafted by a woman who saw me as nothing more than a fool to be manipulated. Albert reached across the table and squeezed her hand, their fingers intertwining in a gesture so intimate it made me physically ill. He told her how much he loved her, how excited he was about their child, how perfectly everything was working out. They had been planning this for months, he said. The pregnancy, the timing, even this dinner was all part of their elaborate deception. I watched my wife, the mother of the child I had been preparing to love with every fiber of my being, nod and smile as her lover praised her for her ability to lie to my face. She was good at it, he said, a natural actress. She could make me believe anything. The waiter approached our table asking if we needed anything else. I looked up at him, my throat dry, my voice somehow steady despite the earthquake happening inside my chest. Actually, yes, I said, my words cutting through their German conversation like a blade through silk. I think we need to discuss something important. Albert and Cassidy both turned to look at me, their faces still relaxed and happy, not yet realizing that everything was about to change. I reached for the wine bottle, my movements deliberate and controlled. I poured myself a generous glass, the dark red liquid catching the candlelight like blood. Then I set the bottle down carefully, precisely, in the exact center of the table. I raised my glass slightly as if making a toast, and looked directly into Albert's surprised eyes. Prost, I said clearly, letting the German word hang in the air between us. To new beginnings and the end of illusions. The color drained from Cassidy's face so quickly I thought she might faint. Albert's mouth fell open, his confident smile crumbling into something approaching terror. The silence that followed my German toast was deafening. I could hear my own heartbeat, could hear the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, could hear the gentle murmur of conversations from other tables where other couples were probably having normal, honest dinners, where other men weren't discovering that their entire lives had been elaborate lies. Cassidy's wine glass trembled in her hand. A few drops of the burgundy liquid spilled onto the crisp white tablecloth, spreading like a small blood stain. Her green eyes, the ones I had fallen in love with 6 years ago, darted between Albert and me like a trapped animal looking for an escape route that didn't exist. Albert recovered first, though barely. His face had gone from confident charm to something approaching panic in the space of a heartbeat. He straightened his tie, a nervous gesture that betrayed the composure he was desperately trying to maintain. "Neil," he said carefully, his accent thicker now, more pronounced. "I think perhaps there has been some misunderstanding." I set my wine glass down with deliberate precision, the same way I approached everything in my work as an engineer. Measured, calculated, every movement purposeful. "Oh, I don't think there's any misunderstanding at all, Albert," I replied in English, keeping my voice conversational, almost friendly. "I understood perfectly, every word." Cassidy finally found her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Neil, baby, you don't speak German. You're confused. Albert was just telling me about his family, about his mother who lives in Munich." The lie came so easily to her lips. Even now, caught red-handed, she was still trying to manipulate me, still believing she could talk her way out of this. The woman who had shared my bed for 5 years, who had cried in my arms about her difficult childhood, who had made me believe I was the love of her life, was looking directly into my eyes and lying without a moment's hesitation. "Your German is quite good, Cassidy," I said, still maintaining that conversational tone that was driving them both toward panic. "Much better than you ever let on. Especially that part about me being an idiot who would raise another man's son thinking it was mine. Your pronunciation of Tölpelhaft was particularly impressive." She went completely white. Not pale, not flushed, but truly white, as if every drop of blood had drained from her body. Her hand, the one that had been caressing her belly just moments before in what I now knew was a mockery of maternal love, began to shake violently. Albert leaned forward, his voice urgent now, all pretense of casual dinner conversation abandoned. "Neil, listen to me. This is not what you think. Cassidy and I, we work together, yes, but tonight, this was just business discussion." I almost laughed. Almost. The absurdity of it was overwhelming. Here was a man who had just heard his lover discuss their plan to trick me into raising his child, and he was still trying to convince me it was business. "Business," I repeated slowly, as if tasting the word. "Is that what you call it when you tell the mother of your child how proud you are of her performance? When you discuss how excited you are about your son? When you plan how to deceive her husband?" The words hung in the air like an accusation, like a judgment. Around us, the restaurant continued its elegant dance. Waiters glided between tables. Other diners laughed and clinked glasses. The world moved on as if mine hadn't just shattered into a million irreparable pieces. I thought about the past 3 months, every moment since Cassidy had announced the pregnancy. How happy I had been, how I had started planning nurseries and college funds and father-son fishing trips, how I'd called my parents, barely able to contain my joy as I told them they were going to be grandparents, how I had started reading books about fatherhood, about being the kind of dad I had always wanted to be. All of it based on a lie. All of it a cruel joke shared between two people who saw me as nothing more than a convenient fool. Cassidy reached across the table, her fingers trying to find mine. I pulled my hand away before she could touch me, the gesture sharp enough that she flinched. "Neil, please," she said, her voice breaking now, tears starting to form in those green eyes that I had once thought were the most beautiful things in the world. "You have to let me explain. You don't understand what you heard. My German isn't that good. I must have said something wrong, something that sounded different than what I meant." Even now, even caught in the most obvious lie imaginable, she was still trying to gaslight me, still trying to make me doubt what I had heard with my own ears, what I had understood with perfect clarity. It was masterful, really. If I hadn't been fluent in German, if I hadn't understood every cruel word, I might have believed her. I might have convinced myself that I had misunderstood, that my suspicious mind had twisted innocent words into something sinister. The realization of how completely I had been fooled was almost as devastating as the betrayal itself. How many other times had she lied to me? How many other conversations had she had about me in languages she thought I couldn't understand? How many other people knew about her deception, her performance as the loving wife? "How long?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Albert and Cassidy exchanged a look, a moment of silent communication that told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't new. This wasn't a recent mistake or a momentary weakness. This was established, comfortable, routine. "How long?" I repeated, louder this time. Cassidy opened her mouth, probably to deliver another lie, but Albert placed a hand on her arm. Something had changed in his expression. Maybe it was resignation. Maybe it was relief that the deception was finally over. Or maybe it was just arrogance, the belief that now that I knew the truth, there was nothing I could do about it. 2 years, he said simply. 2 years. I sat there doing the math, remembering. 2 years ago was when Cassidy had started working more closely with Albert's company, when she had begun traveling frequently for business, when she had started coming home later, when she had begun buying expensive clothes and jewelry that she claimed were gifts from herself for working so hard. 2 years of elaborate deception, 2 years of her coming home to me after being with him, of sharing dinners and conversations and intimacies while living a complete double life. 2 years of making me believe I was loved while she was actively planning to deceive me in the cruelest way possible. The pregnancy timeline suddenly made perfect sense. She hadn't gotten pregnant with my child during our romantic weekend getaway to the coast 3 months ago. The trip I had thought had rekindled our relationship. She had already been pregnant when we went away, already carrying Albert's child while letting me believe I was making love to my wife instead of to my betrayer. "The baby," I said, my voice hollow now, all emotion drained away. "When is the due date? The real due date?" Cassidy's tears were flowing freely now, mascara creating dark tracks down her perfectly made-up cheeks. "Neil, please. We can work this out. We can go to counseling. We can fix this." "When?" I insisted. "December," Albert answered when Cassidy couldn't. "December 15th. I counted backwards in my head. If she was due in December, that meant she had gotten pregnant in March. But she hadn't told me about the pregnancy until June, claiming she was just 6 weeks along. Another lie. Another calculated deception designed to make me believe the child was mine. The waiter appeared at our table again, his professional smile faltering as he took in the scene. Cassidy crying, Albert looking grim and defensive, me sitting perfectly still like a man in shock. "Is everything all right here?" he asked carefully. "Actually," I said, standing up slowly, my legs surprisingly steady despite the fact that my entire world had just collapsed. "I think I need some air. Albert, I believe you'll be taking care of the check tonight. It seems like the least you can do." I reached for my wallet, but Albert waved me off. "Neil, wait, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to handle this situation." Handle this situation. As if my destroyed marriage was a business problem to be solved, a complication in their love affair that needed to be managed. "There's nothing to handle," I said, my voice perfectly calm now, almost conversational. "You two can have each other. You've already been having each other for 2 years. You're having a child together. It seems like everything has worked out exactly as you planned." I started to walk away, but Cassidy's voice stopped me. "Where are you going?" she called out, loud enough that other diners turned to look. "Neil, you can't just leave. We live together. We're married. We have to work this out." I turned back to look at her. This woman who had shared my bed and my dreams and my hopes for the future, while systematically destroying everything real between us. She looked desperate now, frightened, as if she was only just beginning to understand that her carefully constructed world was about to fall apart. "No, Cassidy," I said quietly. "We don't have to work anything out. You made your choice 2 years ago. You made it again 3 months ago when you decided to try to trick me into believing your lover's child was mine. And you made it tonight when you sat here laughing about how easy it was to fool me." The restaurant around us had grown quieter, other patrons clearly aware that they were witnessing something dramatic but trying to pretend otherwise. I didn't care. Let them watch. Let them see what happened when a man's life fell apart over German wine and sauerbraten. "You want to know the funny thing?" I said, looking between the two of them. "I actually loved you, both of you in different ways. I loved you, Cassidy, with everything I had. And I respected you, Albert, as a colleague and a businessman. I thought you were both better than this, I pulled out my phone and set it carefully on the table in front of them. "I've been recording our conversation since you started speaking German," I lied smoothly, watching their faces crumble with the implication. Amazing what technology can do these days. Translation software, voice recognition. A man doesn't even need to speak German to understand what's being said about him. Of course, I hadn't been recording anything, but they didn't know that. And the fear in their eyes told me everything I needed to know about how much they had to lose if the truth came out. "I'll be gone when you get home," I told Cassidy as I picked up my phone. "Don't try to contact me. Don't try to explain. Don't try to fix this. Some things can't be fixed. I walked away from the table, away from my wife and her lover and their child and their elaborate deception, feeling strangely lighter with each step. Behind me, I could hear Cassidy calling my name, her voice high and desperate. But I didn't turn around. I drove around the city for 2 hours after leaving the restaurant, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I wasn't ready to go home yet, wasn't ready to face the physical reminders of a marriage that had been nothing but an elaborate performance. The house we had chosen together, the photos on the mantel, the nursery we had started planning in the spare bedroom, all of it contaminated now by the truth. Instead, I found myself parked outside a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, nursing coffee that tasted like motor oil and trying to make sense of what I had learned. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unforgiving glow that seemed appropriate for the moment. This wasn't the kind of revelation that deserved soft candlelight and wine glasses. This was the kind of truth that needed to be examined under the brightest, most unforgiving light possible. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I left the restaurant. 17 missed calls from Cassidy, 11 text messages that I couldn't bring myself to read. 3 calls from Albert, which surprised me. What could he possibly have to say? What excuse could he offer for sleeping with another man's wife and planning to trick that man into raising his child? I finally turned the phone completely off and sat in the silence, trying to remember when I had first started learning German. My grandmother, Oma Greta, had been a formidable woman who believed that education was the only thing that could never be taken away from you. She had survived the war, immigrated to America with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination to build a better life for her family. Every summer, from the time I was 8 until I turned 16, she had made me spend 2 months with her, speaking nothing but German. At first I had hated it. I was a typical American kid who wanted to spend his summers playing baseball and riding bikes, not conjugating verbs and memorizing vocabulary. But Oma Greta was relentless. She would hide my comic books until I could recite my lessons perfectly. She would make me translate American movies as we watched them together. She would speak to me only in German, forcing me to respond in kind or go without whatever I was asking for. By the time I was in high school, I was completely fluent. More than fluent, actually. I could think in German, dream in German, understand not just the words but the subtle cultural nuances that gave those words meaning. It was a skill I was proud of, but it had never seemed relevant to my adult life. None of my friends spoke German. I didn't travel to German-speaking countries. I had never even mentioned it on job applications because it wasn't useful for an electrical engineer working with American companies. I had certainly never told Cassidy about it. When we first started dating, she had mentioned studying German in college, and I had nodded politely and changed the subject. There had been no reason to reveal my fluency. It was just one of those random facts about myself that didn't seem worth sharing, like the fact that I could juggle or that I knew all the words to every Beatles song. Now that random, seemingly irrelevant skill had revealed the most important truth of my life. When I finally drove home, it was nearly midnight. The house was dark, except for the porch light that Cassidy always left on for me when I worked late. A normal gesture from a normal wife in what I had thought was a normal marriage. Now even that small kindness felt calculated, part of the performance she had been putting on for 2 years. Her car was in the garage, but I could see she was awake. Light spilled out from under the bedroom door, and I could hear her moving around upstairs. Pacing probably, planning what to say when I came home, crafting the next set of lies that might save her carefully constructed deception. I didn't go upstairs. Instead, I went to my study. The one room in the house that was completely mine. Dark leather furniture that I had chosen, bookshelves filled with technical manuals and classic novels, a desk where I sometimes worked on freelance projects or just sat and thought. It smelled like the expensive scotch I kept in the bottom drawer and the leather cleaner I used on the furniture. It was my sanctuary, the place I retreated to when I needed to think. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 18-year-old scotch, a bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. This seemed like as special as occasions got, though not in the way I had ever imagined. That was when I started really thinking about the timeline, really examining the past 2 years with the cold analytical mind I used for solving engineering problems. If Cassidy and Albert had been having an affair for 2 years, there would be evidence. Patterns, inconsistencies that I had ignored or explained away because I had trusted my wife implicitly. I opened my laptop and started going through our financial records, something I rarely did because Cassidy handled most of our household expenses. She had a degree in business administration and had always been good with money, or so I had thought. I gave her access to our joint checking account and trusted her to manage everything while I focused on my career. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 2 years, there had been charges I had never seen before. Expensive dinners at restaurants I had never been to, hotel rooms in cities where Cassidy claimed to be traveling alone for business, purchases at lingerie stores that specialized in items I had never seen her wear. The amounts weren't huge individually, but they added up. Nearly $20,000 in unexplained expenses, all carefully hidden among legitimate household costs. But it was the patterns that really told the story. Every month, like clockwork, there were charges at the same upscale hotel in downtown, the Meridian, where rooms started at $400 a night. Always on Thursday afternoons, always followed by charges at expensive restaurants nearby. Sometimes there were purchases at jewelry stores, designer boutiques, spas that specialized in couples treatments. I cross-referenced the dates with Cassidy's work calendar, which she kept meticulously updated on our shared computer. Every Thursday hotel charge corresponded with a notation that read, "Client meeting, A.R. Albert Richter." She had been documenting her affair in our shared calendar, probably thinking I would never bother to look. The jewelry purchases were particularly devastating. I found receipts for a diamond tennis bracelet worth $8,000, purchased just 3 weeks after our 5th wedding anniversary. She had told me it was a gift to herself for landing a big client, a reward for her hard work. I had been proud of her success, proud that my wife was doing so well in her career that she could afford to treat herself to something special. Now I realized it had probably been a gift from Albert, purchased with money from our joint account. She had used my money to buy herself jewelry from her lover, then lied to my face about where it came from. The audacity of it was breathtaking. I found the receipt for the pregnancy test, purchased 2 weeks before she told me she was expecting. Not one test, but 3 different brands, as if she wanted to be absolutely certain before she started the next phase of her deception. The date was devastating. March 23rd. If she had been testing for pregnancy in late March, she would have conceived sometime in early March. I had been traveling for work during the first 2 weeks of March, attending a conference in Seattle. She had been home alone, except she hadn't been alone at all. The conference receipts were all there in our records. My flight to Seattle, my hotel, my meals, all carefully documented for tax purposes. I had been 3,000 miles away when my wife conceived another man's child, then had come home to find her unusually affectionate, unusually eager to be intimate. She had been covering her tracks, making sure that when she announced the pregnancy, I would believe the timing made sense. I pulled out a calculator and started doing the math more precisely. If she was due December 15th, as Albert had said, and if a pregnancy lasted an average of 40 weeks from the last menstrual period, she would have conceived around March 20th, right in the middle of my Seattle trip. Right when I couldn't possibly have been the father. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, mathematical. Not only had my wife been cheating on me for 2 years, not only was she carrying another man's child, but she had planned the entire deception with scientific precision. She had calculated dates, manipulated timelines, and created an elaborate fiction designed to make me believe I was going to be a father. I heard footsteps on the stairs. soft and hesitant. Cassidy, finally working up the courage to face me. I quickly closed the laptop and took another sip of scotch, steeling myself for whatever performance she had prepared. She appeared in the doorway wearing one of my old college t-shirts and pajama pants, her makeup scrubbed off, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She looked young and vulnerable and scared, exactly the way she had looked on our first morning together 6 years ago. It was masterful acting, really. If I didn't know what I knew, if I hadn't heard her laughing about my stupidity just hours earlier, I might have felt sorry for her. "Neil," her voice was small, uncertain. "Can we talk?" I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the one where she used to sit when we planned our finances together or discussed our future. Now it felt like an interrogation chair, a place where suspects came to confess their crimes. She sat down carefully, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes red from crying. Real tears or another part of the performance? At this point, I wasn't sure I could tell the difference. "I know you're angry," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know you think you heard something that sounded terrible, but Neil, you have to believe me. You misunderstood. My German isn't good enough to say what you think you heard." Even now, even after everything, she was sticking to the lie. Not just sticking to it, but doubling down, trying to convince me that my own ears had betrayed me, that my perfect understanding of a language I had spoken fluently for 30 years was somehow flawed. "Tell me about the meridian," I said calmly. The color drained from her face instantly. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. "Tell me about the $8,000 bracelet you bought yourself 3 weeks after our anniversary," I continued. "Tell me about the pregnancy test you bought on March 23rd, 2 weeks before you told me you were expecting. Tell me about Albert Richter and why you've been meeting him at expensive hotels every Thursday for the past 18 months. She was shaking now, her hands trembling visibly as the weight of being truly caught settled over her. Not caught in a moment of weakness, not caught in a single lie, but caught in an elaborate, systematic deception that had been going on for 2 years. "How long have you known?" she whispered finally. "I've known about tonight since tonight," I said truthfully, "but I've been learning about the rest of it for the past 3 hours. Amazing what financial records can tell you when you actually bother to look at them." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that seemed genuine. But then, all of her emotions had seemed genuine until a few hours ago. I had lost the ability to distinguish between truth and performance where Cassidy was concerned. "Neil, please," she said through her tears. "Let me explain. It's not what you think. It's complicated." "No," I said quietly, finishing my scotch and setting the glass down with finality. "Actually, it's very simple. You've been having an affair for 2 years. You're pregnant with your lover's child. You were planning to trick me into raising that child as my own. There's nothing complicated about it." I stood up, suddenly exhausted by the effort of maintaining my calm facade. "I'll be staying in a hotel tonight. Tomorrow I'll be calling a lawyer. I suggest you do the same." As I walked toward the door, she called after me one last time. "What about us? What about our marriage? What about the baby?" I turned back to look at her, this woman who had shared my bed and my dreams and my hopes for the future, while systematically destroying everything real between us. "There is no us," I said simply. "There never was. And it's not my baby." Then I walked out of my study, out of my house, and out of the life I had thought was mine but had never really existed at all. The hotel room smelled like industrial-strength carpet cleaner and the ghosts of 1,000 business travelers. I sat on the edge of the bed at 2 in the morning, staring at my phone and waiting for morning so I could start making the calls that would dismantle my life with the same precision Cassidy had used to destroy it. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cassidy's face at dinner, radiant and cruel as she told Albert how easy it was to fool me. I heard her voice describing me as an idiot who would raise another man's son without question. I felt that moment of realization over and over again, that sickening drop in my stomach as everything I thought I knew crumbled into dust. The financial records were spread across the hotel desk like evidence in a crime scene, which I supposed they were. I had printed everything out before leaving the house, wanting physical proof of the systematic theft and deception. $20,000 over 2 years might not sound like much to some people, but it wasn't really about the money. It was about the elaborate planning, the casual cruelty of using my own resources to fund her betrayal. But as devastating as the financial evidence was, it paled in comparison to what I had discovered in Cassidy's email account. She had never been particularly careful about computer security, and we had shared passwords for most of our accounts for years. It was one of those married couple conveniences that had seemed sweet and trusting at the time. Now it gave me access to a digital record of her double life that was more damning than anything I could have imagined. The emails with Albert went back 26 months, starting innocuously enough with work-related discussions, but quickly evolving into something much more intimate. I read them in chronological order, watching in real time as a professional relationship became flirtation, then seduction, then a full-blown affair complete with detailed plans for their secret meetings. Albert, it turned out, was married. Not just married, but married to a woman named Helena whose family owned a chain of luxury hotels across Europe. Helena Richter wasn't just wealthy. She was generationally wealthy, the kind of money that came with social expectations and public scrutiny. Albert couldn't afford a messy divorce, couldn't risk his wife discovering his affairs. So he had made Cassidy his kept woman, setting her up with an allowance and expensive gifts while maintaining the facade of his respectable marriage. The pregnancy had been planned. Not just planned, but strategically timed to coincide with what Albert called the Seattle opportunity. They had known about my conference weeks in advance, had used my travel schedule to ensure that the conception would happen while I was conveniently 3,000 miles away. In one particularly nauseating email, Cassidy had joked about how excited I had been when she told me she was ovulating right when I got back from my trip. They had been laughing at me, not just deceiving me, but actively mocking my trust, my joy, my excitement about becoming a father. In their emails, I was referred to as the husband, as if I were just a role to be managed rather than a human being with feelings and rights, and a heart that could be broken. The most devastating email was from just 2 weeks ago. Albert had written to Cassidy about his long-term plans, about how they would handle the situation after the baby was born. He wanted her to wait until the child was at least 2 years old before initiating divorce proceedings, long enough for me to be firmly attached to the child, long enough for the courts to view me as the father regardless of biological reality. Then she would leave me, taking half of everything I had built while he quietly supported her from the shadows. It was a 10-year plan. They had mapped out a decade of my life without my knowledge or consent, had decided that I would spend the next 10 years loving and raising a child who wasn't mine while they enjoyed the benefits of both his wealth and mine. After the divorce, I would still be responsible for child support for a child I had never actually fathered, while they lived openly together with my money funding their lifestyle. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. These weren't crimes of passion or moments of weakness. This was a calculated, long-term conspiracy designed to extract maximum benefit from my trust and my love, while giving nothing real in return. But perhaps the worst part was reading about their assessment of my character, their analysis of why their plan would work. Albert had written extensively about my pathological need to be needed, my desperate desire for family, my emotional dependence on female approval. He had psychoanalyzed me like a specimen, identifying my vulnerabilities with clinical precision and explaining to Cassidy exactly how to exploit them. He wasn't wrong. I had always been the kind of man who found his identity in taking care of others, in being useful, in being loved. My parents had divorced when I was 12, and I had spent my teenage years desperately trying to keep everyone happy, trying to be the perfect son who might somehow hold the family together through sheer force of goodness. It hadn't worked, but the pattern had stuck. I found women who needed me, who let me feel important and valued in exchange for my time, my money, my emotional labor. Cassidy had understood this about me from the beginning. In one email, she described our early relationship with devastating accuracy, explaining how she had let me believe I was rescuing her from a difficult life, how she had played up her vulnerabilities to make me feel strong and protective. Every intimate moment we had shared, every time she had cried in my arms about her difficult childhood, or her struggles with self-confidence, had been a calculated performance designed to bind me more tightly to her. I had fallen in love with a fiction. Worse, I had fallen in love with a fiction that was specifically designed to exploit my deepest emotional needs while serving her financial interests. The hotel room felt like a tomb as I sat there surrounded by the evidence of my own gullibility. But mixed with the pain and humiliation was something else, something cold and focused that I barely recognized as part of myself. It was rage, yes, but rage transformed into something more useful, something like determination. They had made one crucial mistake in their elaborate plan. They had underestimated me. Albert's emails revealed a great deal more than just his relationship with Cassidy. He was apparently a serial adulterer, with at least 2 other women receiving similar allowances and gifts over the past 5 years. He had a pattern, a system for managing multiple affairs while keeping his wife ignorant and his reputation intact. But patterns could be exposed and systems could be disrupted. More importantly, his emails contained detailed information about his business dealings, including several ventures that existed in legal gray areas, import duties that were being avoided through creative paperwork, tax shelters that pushed the boundaries of legality, partnerships with companies that existed only on paper. Albert was the kind of businessman who believed rules were for other people, and his correspondence with Cassidy included enough incriminating details to cause serious problems for him if they fell into the wrong hands. I spent the rest of the night making notes, creating a timeline, organizing evidence. Not just evidence of the affair, but evidence of everything. Financial irregularities, tax issues, immigration problems related to Albert's frequent travel between countries. By morning, I had assembled a comprehensive dossier that would make Albert's life very complicated if it became public. But I wasn't interested in public exposure. Public exposure was messy, unpredictable, potentially damaging to me as well as to them. I was interested in something much more precise, much more satisfying. When the sun finally came up, I called my lawyer first, then my accountant, then my bank. By 10 in the morning, I had frozen our joint accounts, initiated proceedings to protect my individual assets, and begun the process of documenting every shared expense from the past 2 years. I was treating this like the business transaction it had always been, approaching it with the same methodical precision I brought to engineering problems. The divorce would be swift and brutal. Cassidy would discover that the man she had dismissed as an easily manipulated fool was actually quite capable of protecting his interests when necessary. She would get nothing beyond what the law absolutely required, and given the evidence of her financial deception, even that would be minimal. But Albert was a different matter entirely. Albert required a more sophisticated approach. I made one more phone call that morning to a private investigator I had worked with years earlier on a patent dispute case, someone who specialized in corporate investigations, who understood how to gather information without leaving fingerprints, who knew how to turn evidence into leverage. "I need you to look into someone," I told him. "Someone who has been very careless about keeping secrets." By noon, the machinery of my revenge was in motion. Quiet, legal, devastating revenge that would unfold over weeks and months rather than moments. The kind of revenge that would teach both of them that some people should not be underestimated, some trust should not be betrayed, and some hearts should not be broken for sport. I checked out of the hotel and drove back to my house to collect some clothes and personal items. Cassidy was gone, probably at work, probably trying to maintain the fiction that everything was normal while her world prepared to collapse around her. But there was a note on my desk, written in her careful handwriting on expensive stationery that I had probably paid for without realizing it. "Neil, I know you won't believe me, but I do love you. I never meant for things to go this far. Please call me. We can fix this if you'll just give me a chance to explain. The baby could still be yours. The timing isn't as clear as you think it is. Please don't throw away our marriage over a misunderstanding. I'm begging you. Cassidy." I read the note twice, marveling at her ability to lie even when she had nothing left to lose. The baby could still be mine. Even now, even after I had heard her call it Albert's son in perfect German, she was still trying to plant seeds of doubt. I folded the note carefully and put it in my jacket pocket, not because I believed a word of it, but because it was evidence of her continued attempts to manipulate me even after being caught. My lawyer would find it useful. Then I walked through the house one last time, looking at the life I had thought was mine. The kitchen where we had cooked dinner together, the living room where we had watched movies and made plans for the future, the bedroom where we had made love and talked about our dreams. All of it contaminated now by the knowledge of what it had really been. But I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't even angry. I was something much more dangerous than angry. I was motivated. 3 weeks had passed since that devastating dinner at Das House, and my carefully orchestrated plan was finally ready to unfold. I had learned patience from my grandmother, who used to say that revenge served cold was twice as satisfying as revenge served hot. She had been talking about a neighbor who had stolen from her garden, but the principle applied perfectly to my current situation. The private investigator I had hired, Marcus Chen, was worth every penny of the $15,000 I had paid him. He was a former federal agent who specialized in corporate investigations, and he had provided me with enough evidence to destroy both Albert and Cassidy in ways they couldn't possibly have anticipated. Albert's business empire, it turned out, was built on a foundation of creative accounting and legal gray areas that wouldn't survive close scrutiny. More importantly, his wife Helena wasn't just wealthy in her own right. She was also famously vindictive when it came to her husband's infidelities. According to Marcus's research, she had discovered Albert's previous affairs and had quietly made each of his mistresses disappear from his life through a combination of financial pressure and social ostracism. Helena Richter didn't just have money. She had the kind of old European money that came with connections to banks, government officials, and media outlets. She could make people's lives very difficult without ever having to get her hands dirty. Albert knew this, which was why he had been so careful to keep his relationship with Cassidy hidden from her. But secrets have a way of coming to light when the right person decides to illuminate them. I was sitting in my new apartment, a sleek downtown loft that cost $3,000 more per month than my suburban house but felt infinitely more honest, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Cassidy's number, the first time she had tried to contact me in over a week. I almost didn't answer. We were well into divorce proceedings and my lawyer had advised me to let all communication go through him. But curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to know what new lie she might have crafted, what new manipulation she might attempt. Neil? Her voice was small, frightened, completely different from the confident woman who had laughed about my stupidity 3 weeks earlier. Please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. About what? My voice was flat, emotionless. I had learned to speak to her the way I might speak to a stranger asking for directions with polite indifference. About Albert. About what's happening. Neil, I think I made a terrible mistake. I leaned back in my leather chair, genuinely curious now. What kind of mistake? There was a long pause, filled with the sound of her breathing, shaky and irregular. He's not who I thought he was. The things he's been asking me to do, the way he's been treating me since that dinner. Neil, I think he might be dangerous. Dangerous. That was interesting. From what Marcus had discovered, Albert was many things: ruthless, manipulative, criminal in some of his business dealings, but not physically dangerous. Unless she was referring to a different kind of danger entirely. What has he been asking you to do? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He wants me to lie in the divorce proceedings. He wants me to claim the baby is yours, to demand child support, to take half of everything you have. He says if I don't, he'll cut me off completely. He'll make sure I never work in this industry again. So Albert was pressuring her to continue the deception even after I had discovered the truth. That was exactly what I had expected him to do and exactly what I had been counting on. And you're calling me because I can't do it anymore, Neil. Because I'm scared of what will happen if I keep lying. And I'm scared of what will happen if I stop. Because I know you hate me, but you're the only person who might be able to help me. The irony was breathtaking. The woman who had spent 2 years lying to me, who had planned to trick me into raising another man's child, who had mocked my trust and my love, was now asking for my help because her co-conspirator was threatening her. Why would Albert care what you do in our divorce? I asked, though I already knew the answer. If he loves you, if he wants to be with you, why wouldn't he just divorce his own wife and marry you? Silence. Long, telling silence. "He's not going to leave Helena, is he?" I pressed. "He never was. You were just a convenient mistress who got inconveniently pregnant." "You don't understand," she whispered. "It's complicated. His wife, she's not just rich, she's connected. If she found out about me, about the baby, she could destroy both of us. Albert says we have to wait. We have to be careful." "How long do you have to wait, Cassidy? 5 years? 10? Until the child is grown? Until Helena dies of old age?" She started crying then, soft sobs that might have moved me once upon a time. Now they just sounded like the complaints of someone who had discovered that actions have consequences. "I know I don't deserve your help," she said through her tears. "I know what I did to you was unforgivable. But Neil, I'm pregnant and alone and scared. And I don't know what else to do. Pregnant and alone and scared. The perfect victim narrative designed to appeal to my protective instincts, my need to help people in trouble. A year ago, it would have worked. A year ago, I would have dropped everything to rescue her, regardless of what she had done to me. But that was before I had learned to see her clearly, before I understood that every emotion she displayed was calculated for maximum effect. "You're not alone," I said calmly. "You have Albert, the father of your child, your lover of 2 years, your business partner in deception. Why don't you ask him for help?" "Because he doesn't care about me." The mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the panic underneath. "He never cared about me. I was just useful to him, just someone he could control. And now that things have gotten complicated, now that you know the truth, he just wants to manage the situation. He wants to manage me." Welcome to the club, I thought, but didn't say. Albert had been managing her for 2 years, just like she had been managing me. The difference was that I had loved her, while Albert had simply used her. "What exactly do you want from me, Cassidy?" "I want to tell the truth in the divorce. I want to admit that the baby isn't yours, that I've been lying about everything. I want to stop taking your money, stop demanding things I'm not entitled to. But Albert says if I do that, he'll ruin me. He'll make sure I can't find work anywhere. He'll tell everyone I'm unstable, unreliable. He has connections, Neil. He can destroy my reputation with a phone call." So she wanted to confess, but only because continuing the lie had become more dangerous than telling the truth. Not because she felt guilty, not because she wanted to do the right thing, but because Albert was no longer protecting her, and she needed a new protector. "And you think I should protect you from the consequences of your own choices? I think you should want the truth to come out," she said, her voice gaining strength as she found her angle. "I think you should want everyone to know that you're not the father, that you're not responsible for this child. I think you should want your freedom." She wasn't wrong. I did want my freedom, and I did want the truth to come out. But not because she was offering it to me as a gift. The truth was going to come out regardless, in ways that would be far more devastating than anything she could achieve by simply confessing in divorce court. "I'll think about it," I lied smoothly. "But Cassidy, you need to understand something. Whatever protection you think I might offer you, whatever help you think I might provide, you gave up the right to that 2 years ago when you started lying to me. You certainly gave it up 3 weeks ago when you sat in that restaurant laughing about how easy it was to fool me." "Neil, please." "I'll be in touch," I said, and hung up before she could say anything else. I sat in the silence of my new apartment, looking out at the city lights, feeling something that might have been satisfaction if it hadn't been so cold. Cassidy was finally beginning to understand the position she had put herself in. Albert was showing his true colors, revealing that she had never been anything more to him than a useful tool. And tomorrow, the final phase of my plan would begin. I had sent Helena Richter a carefully crafted email 3 days earlier, using an anonymous account and including just enough information to pique her curiosity without revealing my identity. Details about Albert's Thursday afternoon hotel visits, copies of credit card receipts for jewelry purchases that had never appeared in her jewelry box, photographs that Marcus had taken of Albert and Cassidy together at restaurants around the city. Nothing that could be traced back to me. Nothing that violated any laws, just information that a concerned citizen thought she should have about her husband's activities. Helena had responded within hours, hiring her own investigators to verify the information I had provided. By now, she would have confirmation that her husband was not only having an affair, but that he had gotten his mistress pregnant and was planning to use another man's money to support their child. According to Marcus's research into her previous responses to Albert's infidelities, Helena didn't get mad. She got thorough. She would dismantle Albert's life piece by piece, methodically and legally, using her resources and connections to ensure that he lost everything that mattered to him. His business partnerships, his social standing, his comfortable lifestyle, all of it would disappear as she exerted the kind of pressure that money and influence could bring to bear. Albert thought he was safe because he had been careful. He thought his wealth and his charm and his carefully cultivated reputation would protect him. He had never imagined that his discarded victims might be intelligent enough, patient enough, or motivated enough to destroy him using his own weapons against him. Tomorrow morning, Helena's lawyers would serve Albert with divorce papers and a restraining order. His business accounts would be frozen pending investigation into potential financial irregularities that an anonymous tip had brought to the attention of the appropriate authorities. His carefully constructed world would begin to collapse, and he would be too busy trying to save himself to worry about managing Cassidy or pressuring her to continue lying. And Cassidy herself would discover that being the pregnant mistress of a powerful man was a very different thing than being the pregnant mistress of a man whose power had just evaporated overnight. I poured myself a glass of wine, a bottle I had chosen myself from a wine shop I had discovered in my new neighborhood, and raised it in a toast to my grandmother's memory. "Revenge served cold, O Magretta," I said aloud. "Just like you taught me." The city sparkled beyond my windows, full of possibilities I was only beginning to explore. For the first time in 2 years, maybe longer, I felt genuinely free. Not just free from Cassidy's lies or Albert's manipulation, but free from the need to be someone else's solution to their problems. My phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. "It's done. Helena's people moved faster than expected. Albert's offices were sealed this morning, and he's been arrested on charges of tax evasion and fraud. Thought you'd want to know." I smiled, feeling the last pieces of my carefully laid plan click into place. Albert would spend the next several years dealing with federal charges, divorce proceedings, and the complete destruction of his business empire. He wouldn't have time to threaten anyone, wouldn't have resources to ruin careers or manipulate frightened pregnant women. And Cassidy would be truly alone for the first time in years, forced to face the consequences of her choices without anyone to protect her or manage the situation for her. It was, as my grandmother would have said, a very satisfying dinner indeed. 6 months later, I was sitting in a coffee shop near my new office, reading the morning paper and genuinely enjoying the simple pleasure of a quiet Saturday morning, when I saw the headline that brought the whole sorry chapter of my life to a satisfying close. Local businessman sentenced to 7 years for tax evasion and fraud. The article was brief but thorough. Albert Richter, former CEO of Richter International Holdings, had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison and ordered to pay $4.8 million in restitution to various government agencies. His business empire had been liquidated to pay his debts, his assets seized, his reputation destroyed. The article mentioned that his wife, Helena Richter, had divorced him while he was awaiting trial and had publicly stated that she would not be visiting him in prison. There was no mention of Cassidy in the article, but I knew from my lawyer that she had given birth to a son 3 months earlier. A son that Albert would never meet outside of a prison visiting room, assuming Helena didn't use her influence to prevent even that small contact. Cassidy was living with her sister in Phoenix now, working as a receptionist at a medical clinic and struggling to make ends meet on $12 an hour. She had finally told the truth in our divorce proceedings, admitting that the child wasn't mine and relinquishing any claim to alimony or support. Not out of honesty or remorse, but because continuing the lie would have required Albert's backing, and Albert was no longer in a position to back anyone. My lawyer had been pleased with how quickly everything was resolved once she stopped fighting. I folded the newspaper carefully and set it aside, feeling something that might have been closure. Not satisfaction exactly, because there was no joy in seeing 2 people's lives destroyed, even when they had richly deserved their fate. But there was a sense of completion, of justice served and balance restored. The coffee shop was busy with the Saturday morning crowd, families with children, couples reading books together, students with laptops and dreams of changing the world. Normal people living normal lives, unencumbered by elaborate deceptions and carefully calculated betrayals. It was the kind of scene I had forgotten existed during my marriage to Cassidy, when every interaction had been filtered through layers of lies and manipulation. "Excuse me, is this seat taken?" I looked up to find a woman about my age standing next to my table, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. She had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and graying brown hair that she wore in a simple style that somehow made her look both professional and approachable. She was carrying a worn leather briefcase and what appeared to be student papers that needed grading. "Please," I said, gesturing to the chair, "all yours." She sat down with a grateful smile, spreading her papers across the table with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to work in whatever space was available. "Dr. Sarah Mitchell," she said, extending her hand. "And thank you. I have about 30 essays to grade before Monday and my apartment is being fumigated, so I'm temporarily homeless." "Neil Harrison," I replied, shaking her hand. "What subject do you teach?" "Psychology at the community college, and you?" "Electrical engineer. Though I'm between projects at the moment, so I have more free time than usual." She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes in a way I had almost forgotten was possible. Free time. I remember that concept vaguely from graduate school. We worked in comfortable silence for the next hour, she grading papers and occasionally muttering things like, "Did this student even read the assignment?" while I responded to emails from potential new clients. It was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years, sharing space with someone without feeling the need to perform or impress or carefully monitor their mood for signs of disapproval. When she finished her stack of essays, she looked up and caught me watching her. "I'm sorry," she said with a slight laugh. I must have been muttering to myself. "Occupational hazard of grading papers." "Not at all," I said. "I was just thinking how nice it is to work next to someone who's actually doing what they appear to be doing." She raised an eyebrow. "That's an oddly specific thing to appreciate." I found myself telling her about Cassidy, though not in detail and not with bitterness, just the basic facts. A marriage that ended when I discovered my wife had been living a double life. A divorce that was finalized 3 months earlier. The ongoing process of rebuilding my life from scratch. I surprised myself by how easy it was to talk to her, how little emotional charge the story carried when I told it to someone who hadn't been part of it. "I'm sorry," she said when I finished. "That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," I admitted. "But it was also liberating, in a strange way. I spent 2 years thinking I was losing my mind because nothing my wife said ever quite made sense. Nothing she did ever quite added up. Discovering that I wasn't crazy, that she really was lying about everything, was almost a relief." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "I see that sometimes in my students. They come in convinced they're stupid because they can't understand their relationships, can't figure out why nothing their partner does makes sense. Usually it turns out they're not stupid at all. They're just dating someone who lies constantly." "Is that a common phenomenon?" "More common than you'd think," she said. "People who lie pathologically are often very good at making their victims feel like the problem is their own perception rather than the liar's dishonesty. It's a form of psychological manipulation called gaslighting." I thought about that for a moment, remembering how many times Cassidy had made me feel like I was being paranoid or suspicious when I questioned inconsistencies in her stories. "How do people recover from that?" I asked. "Slowly," she said with a smile. "And usually with the help of people who tell them the truth even when it's uncomfortable. People who don't have an agenda beyond basic human kindness." We talked for another hour about psychology, about engineering, about the books we were reading and the places we wanted to travel. She was divorced as well, had been for 3 years after discovering that her ex-husband had been embezzling money from the nonprofit organization where he worked. She understood betrayal. Understood the long process of learning to trust your own judgment again after someone you loved had systematically undermined it. When she finally packed up her papers, I found myself reluctant to let her go. "Would you be interested in having dinner sometime?" I asked, surprised by my own boldness. "Somewhere with honest food and honest conversation?" She smiled. that same genuine expression that had caught my attention earlier. I'd like that very much, as long as you promise not to speak any foreign languages I don't understand. I laughed, a real laugh that came from somewhere deep and unguarded. I promise, English only, and the complete truth, even when it's boring. Especially when it's boring, she said. Boring truth is underrated. We exchanged phone numbers, and I watched her walk away feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Anticipation for the future. Not the desperate hope that someone would love me enough to make my life meaningful, but genuine curiosity about what might develop between two people who had both learned the value of honesty the hard way. That evening, I called my parents for our weekly check-in, something I had started doing after the divorce as a way of reconnecting with family relationships that weren't based on deception. "You sound different," my mother said near the end of our conversation. "Happier, maybe?" "I think I am," I said, looking around my apartment with its clean lines and honest furniture. Its books chosen because I wanted to read them, rather than because they would impress visitors. I think I'm finally learning who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else needs me to be. "That's a good thing to learn," she said, even if it took longer than it should have. After we hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood on my balcony looking out at the city. Somewhere out there, Cassidy was probably trying to put her son to sleep in a small apartment, struggling with the reality of single motherhood and a minimum wage job. Somewhere else, Albert was learning to navigate prison politics and counting the years until his release. Their elaborate deception had collapsed under its own weight, leaving them both worse off than if they had simply been honest from the beginning. I didn't feel sorry for them. Actions have consequences, and they had chosen their actions with full knowledge of the risks involved. But I didn't feel vengeful anymore either. They were no longer part of my story, no longer capable of affecting my peace or my future. They had become what they deserved to become: irrelevant. My phone buzzed with a text message from Sarah. "Just wanted to say thank you for a lovely afternoon. Looking forward to our dinner. And don't worry, I won't test your German fluency." I smiled and typed back, "Looking forward to it too. Fair warning, I'm completely fluent in German, but I promise to only use my powers for good from now on." Her response came quickly. "A man with hidden depths and a sense of humor. I think I'm going to like getting to know you, Neil Harrison." I set my phone aside and went back to looking at the city, at the thousands of lights representing thousands of lives, most of them probably simpler and more honest than the one I had been living for the past 2 years. For the first time since that devastating dinner at Das Haus, I felt genuinely hopeful about the future, not because someone else might love me, not because I might find another person to take care of, but because I had finally learned to like the person I was when no one was watching, when no one was asking me to be anything other than myself. Tomorrow, I would call Sarah and plan our dinner. I would continue building my new business, cultivating relationships based on mutual respect rather than emotional manipulation. I would keep learning who Neil Harrison was when he wasn't trying to save anyone, when he wasn't desperately seeking approval from people who had no intention of giving it honestly. The German word for this feeling, I realized, was Befreiung, liberation, freedom from bondage, freedom from deception, freedom from the exhausting work of being someone else's solution to their problems. My grandmother would have been proud. I had learned her language, and through it, I had learned the most important lesson of all: that sometimes the greatest gift betrayal can give you is the opportunity to discover who you really are when you stop trying to be who someone else needs you to be.